song Gary's playing today from Finnish composer Surveillance. Thank you. So I will admit this right at the top. I'm having inner turmoil today. I have been visiting this little old lady, Jeannie Collins, from my other church ever since I started there. And she passed away. And her family, who do not go to the same church, have decided to let the Missouri Synod pastor do her funeral. Because I'm too squishy when it comes to the doctrine of salvation. Anyway, trying to let it go. But I'm going to go and...
Today's reading is from the 6th chapter of Genesis, beginning at the 5th verse. The Lord saw that the wickedness of human mankind was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made humankind on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, people together with their animals and creeping things and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the sight of the Lord. These are the descendants of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Now I am going to destroy them along with the earth. Make yourself an ark of cypress wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. For this is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its width, 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark, and finish it to a cubit above, and put a door of the ark at its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For my part, I am going to bring a flood of waters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh in which its breath of life. Everything on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every kind shall come in with you, to keep them alive. Also, take with you every kind of food that is eaten, and store it up, and it shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded of him. Here ends the reading.
So the story of Noah and the flood. I used to think this was a children's story when my first wife Kirsten and I were giving birth to Hannah, our oldest daughter. Beforehand, we started rearranging the house and creating a nursery. And we we got a border for the top of the nursery. Remember what a border was? Wallpaper, evil stuff. And it was Noah's Ark theme. And you had all the little animals. Isn't it a cute little children's story? Until you get to the part where God destroys everyone. Then it's not so much a children's story. I remember being a little kid myself and going to Sunday school and seeing my mom, who was the flannel graph lady, one of her many jobs. She would stand up front and she would have these little paper cutouts of animals, and she would place them on a board made out of felt, and they would stick wherever you put them. And she would tell this little story. It was called Flannel Graph. And she would tell the story of the flood, and then just kind of wash over the fact that God sent the rain and everyone else on the earth perished. We use the word perish because we don't want to say they were murdered as they lived, to kind of let God off the hook for this. I remember thinking, well, something's weird about this, and we never read the first part of this story, right? The first part of chapter 6 is, and God noticed that every inclination of their heart was only evil all the time, right? That's quite an over-exaggeration. There's never been a person or a time where every absolute thought of their heart was evil all the time. So at the beginning of this story, those of us who are moderns, who have grown up in an era that something is only true if it actually happened, and truth is the standard for everything, we don't understand hyperbole and exaggeration as a way of dealing with a difficult subject. The ancient Hebrews and most of the rabbis since do not think of this as a literal story. Like if you were back there with a camcorder, you could videotape it. Now it's okay to believe that, or to dig your heels and say, well, that's exactly what it says in the Bible, so it must be true. A lot of people, probably a majority of Christianity, believes that. I used to believe that myself. Until I realized when I went to seminary, one of the hardest things for me was about the second week of seminary. I was in a Hebrew class, and they gave us this sheet of paper. And on one side was the story of Noah and the ark and the flood. And on the other side was a story that said Enuma Elish at the top. I didn't even know how to pronounce it. But the Enuma Elish is a story that was written down thousands of years before the Hebrew story. And they're almost identical in some of the ways that they phrase things. How can that be? How can they must have copied what was in the Bible. Actually, other way around. But it makes sense, because if you are going to tell people about God, it helps to start from somewhere. You're not describing, okay, there is this thing that lives, the being up there. They took what everybody already knew about God, which was the Enuma Elish. Now here's how the Enuma Elish goes, and I would say the truth of this story is in the difference between these two columns. The Enuma Elish begins, there's a bunch of gods, because the ancient Babylonians had multiple gods. They had a god of beer. They had a god of agriculture. They had a god of hunting. They had a god of all kinds of things. And so the gods, plural, got annoyed with the human beings down below because they were too noisy. And they were creating too much of a ruckus. And so, in the Enuma Elish, the gods decided to open the floodgates, and water poured out of the heavens and drowned everybody, and they started over. End of story. Not a very nice story, unless you're trying to get your kids to behave, and you want some big stick to carry around and threaten them. Well, if you make too much noise, guess what's going to happen to you? Like, we can see that, right? That's pretty transparent, the reason for that story. But now let us look at the Hebrew story. What happens? God comes down and says, not that you guys are being too noisy, but that you are being violent. So we have a God who cares about protecting the most vulnerable people from violence. What does that say about God? Is it saying God's petty and doesn't like people to be too loud? Absolutely not. What it says is that our God cares about the least of these. That God is a God who protects people who can't protect themselves. Well, that's different. And so you won't believe this story to actually be true. It starts out by saying every inclination of every human heart was only evil all the time. And then, except for one. And his name was Noah. And God came to Noah and said, all right, I want to give you the task of saving the world from extinction. So I want you to go and find 2 of every animal and build this ark and put them in there. Now, I don't know. That's a pretty tall task for somebody who isn't really a zoologist, doesn't have much experience building boats. To think that he was able to both build a boat and collect all the animals and have them all board 2 by 2 is a stretch of the imagination. But it's supposed to be. The details are not the point. The point is that in God's story, everyone doesn't perish. That there is a part of God who says we always get a second chance. And I'm not talking about the people who drown or about Noah, but the human race gets a second chance. And this is really a story about Israel. God came to Israel and said, you who are a tiny little nation when it comes to significance, one that is always being beaten up, tossed around, enslaved, constantly, you are the ones that I'm going to renew the world through. So this story about God choosing one family and giving them the opportunity to start over is the story of the Israelites understanding that God wanted to bless the world through them. And that Jesus, the Son of God, was coming into the world through them. And that it would be so much bigger than this little family. I think this story tells us a lot about violence. It tells us a lot about God. Today is the day that we remember what happened. If you watched the news this morning, you got to see the coverage on not just the Queen, but on the 9/11 terror act in New York City with the Twin Towers. And one of the things that has been significant in my life is to learn that you cannot solve a violence problem with more violence. I don't know why that is so hard of a concept to grasp. The first George Bush, either knowingly or unknowingly, I'm not sure which is worse, built a military base in the heart of the Muslim Holy Land. Probably not the smartest thing to do. Instantly, there were all of these young Muslim kids who all of a sudden decided that we need revenge. Fast forward, what happens? They come and they find a way for this tiny little group to take down this big nation with violence. And they didn't take down the nation, they simply struck fear into the hearts of people. And what did we do? We signed up people to the military in droves, and we went over there, and I think the quote is, bombed them back to the Stone Age. Because we thought that you can solve a violent problem with a violent solution. And that sort of works for a while if you are more violent. If you have the power to be able to make everybody else submit. It kind of works. It worked for Rome for a long time. Our military went from being a force of good in the world to liberate and to spread democracy to being revengeful. And I don't know how that's going to turn around. The politics we are mired in. I mean, aside from the news coverage this morning, there's a 50-50 split between one side throwing violent jabs at the other side and this side throwing violent jabs at this side. And as long as what we're focused on is eliminating, annihilating our competitors, things are not going to get better. And so this message of the flood is an important one. We need to see that God is a God of nonviolence, a God who protects the most vulnerable. I would say that we could see our church, small as we are in number, but great because we know and understand what God is doing in the world through us. A chance to start over, a chance to have a new message. And each of us can embody that message. A message